All right, let's get into something, well, a lot darker today. You might think our times are tough, but we're about to go way back. Back to a time when punishment wasn't just, a consequence for a crime. No, it was an art form. It was a public show, a terrifying spectacle of power. Just try to wrap your head around that. Stealing a pair of shoes, and the consequence is getting boiled alive or flayed. I mean, this wasn't some rare, over-the-top punishment for a truly shocking crime. This was the baseline. And that's the part that's so hard to grasp. This wasn't the work of some rogue warlord making up rules as they go. This was the law. This was state-sanctioned justice. And it was all carried out in front of crowds who were probably cheering. Think of it like halftime entertainment. So yeah, we're going to peel back the layers of history and take a front row seat at a performance where the main event was punishment, and the star was the human body itself. First up, we're going to look at punishments that were less about the big show and more about pure methodical destruction. This is what you'd call calculated cruelty. It was engineered to break a person, piece by agonizing piece. Okay, kicking things off with the iron boot. Now, this was big in Renaissance Europe, and here's the kicker. Its main goal wasn't even to execute someone. It was all about getting a confession. The whole design was, in its own way, a masterpiece of mechanical torture. So how did this thing actually work? Well, it's all about escalation. First, they'd force your leg into a casing, metal or wood. Then, they'd take these thick wedges and just start hammering them into the gap between the boot and your shin. Every single strike isn't just about pain, it's systematically turning your leg into pulp. And if that wasn't horrific enough, some versions decided to add red-hot coals to the mix. So you're being crushed and grilled at the same time. If you survived, you were left with a limb that was, well, it was just there, completely useless. All right, let's jump over to ancient Rome. Here, the punishments were often designed to symbolically mirror the crime. It's twisted. So, if you committed parricide, that's killing your own parent, the Romans figured you'd acted against nature itself. So your punishment? To die surrounded by total animal chaos. They called it pona culae, or the punishment of the sack. And the logic behind it was just as twisted as the execution. You'd be sewn into a sealed leather bag. But here's the thing, you weren't alone in there. You'd be joined by a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a rooster. 4 terrified animals, all symbols of corruption, just going frantic, biting and scratching as the whole bag is thrown into a river and fills with water. So you're not just drowning, you're being mauled in complete pitch-black darkness. And then, of course, there's impalement. This was a technique pretty much perfected by empires like the Ottomans to make a terrifying example out of people. But here, the goal wasn't a quick death. Oh no, the goal was to make death last as long as humanly possible. The stake was often greased up, but it was aimed with almost surgical precision to miss the vital organs. Yeah, more than a full day. Just let that sink in for a second. The point was never a quick death. The entire process was engineered to drag out the agony, to make sure the victim stayed a living, screaming warning for as long as a human being could possibly endure. All right, now let's shift gears. We're moving into a whole new level of cruelty, where punishment becomes a full-blown theatrical production. These things weren't just carried out in public. They were designed for the public, with a clear, step-by-step, horrific story to tell. And the breaking wheel is a perfect example of this. It was basically a multi-act play of pain. Act 1, the victim is tied down to this huge wheel. Act 2, the executioner comes in with a heavy iron club and just methodically shatters their bones limb by limb. But dying wasn't the finale. The body, now completely pliable, was then woven through the spokes of the wheel, and for the grand finale, the wheel was hoisted up on a pole, leaving the person to die from shock and dehydration as a grotesque public monument for everyone to see. This one was reserved in England for the absolute worst crime you could commit: treason. Being hanged, drawn, and quartered was a whole sequence of tortures. First, you're dragged through the streets by a horse. Then, you're hanged, but only until you're almost dead. And while you're still conscious, they cut you open and disembowel you right there. The final act? Beheading, and then cutting your body into 4 pieces to be sent to the different corners of the kingdom as let's call it a message. But when it comes to combining engineering and pure cruelty, maybe nothing tops the brazen bull from ancient Greece. The concept itself is brutally simple. It's a hollow bronze statue of a bull, big enough to fit a person. You lock someone inside, you light a fire underneath, and you essentially roast them alive.
But here's the truly diabolical part. The inventor designed this complex system of tubes and stops inside the bull's head. It was basically an acoustic device. What it did was convert the victim's screams of agony into a sound that resembled the furious roar of a bull. It literally turned human suffering into an animal sound for the crowd's entertainment. It completely dehumanized the person inside.
And then comes one of history's greatest moments of grim irony. The tyrant who commissioned the bull was apparently so impressed and maybe a little disturbed that he decided he had to test it out right away on the inventor himself. Talk about karma.
Okay, so now we come to our final category, and honestly, this might be the worst. These are the punishments defined not by some brutal, quick action, but by slow, passive, and completely inescapable torment. This is where the psychological horror really peaks. Let's start with bamboo torture. This is a method that was rumored to be used in parts of Asia. And what makes it so uniquely terrifying is that the executioner basically does nothing. The victim is just immobilized over a patch of sharpened bamboo shoots, and then you just let nature do the rest. Bamboo, as you might know, can grow incredibly fast. Within a day, it pierces the skin. Over the next few days, it just keeps growing, driving itself right up through the body, slowly impaling the person from the inside out. Inescapable. But for pure, disgusting, twisted ingenuity, nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to the ancient Persian method of scaphism. It's also known as the boats. And the process was just vile. A victim was trapped between two hollowed-out boats with only their head, arms, and legs sticking out. Then they were force-fed massive amounts of milk and honey. The whole point was to induce severe diarrhea, which would then fill the container they were trapped in. And it gets worse. Their entire body was then also coated in that same sticky mixture, and they were just left adrift in a stagnant swamp. Of course, the mixture attracted insects, tons of them, which would begin to feed on the person and lay eggs in their flesh. But the torture didn't stop there. To make it last as long as possible, guards would come back every single day to force-feed them again, just to keep them alive while they were slowly being consumed from the outside in. 17 days. According to historical accounts, that is how long one poor soul was forced to endure this. Rotting, infested, and suffocating, but deliberately kept alive to experience every single horrific moment of it.
You know, it's a really sobering thought, isn't it? The same human ingenuity that builds incredible civilizations, that creates art and science, that same creativity can be twisted to design unimaginable suffering. These punishments weren't born from simple savagery. They came from careful, deliberate, and, in a twisted way, very creative thinking. And that really brings us to the heart of this whole thing, right? Looking at these methods, it forces us to confront that darker side of human creativity and the systems we build to enforce our own rules. So I want to leave you with this one big question. Where is the line? At what point does a punishment, supposedly designed to deliver justice, cross over into something else entirely? Into just an act of pure performative vengeance? It's a line that societies have drawn and redrawn for centuries. And looking back, man, it shows us just how terrifyingly thin that line can really be.